Hello everybody, Gary Simon here, DesignCourse.com. Welcome to my annual front-end development crash course. This one, of course, for 2024. Now, we're gonna take this design that we created in last week's UI UX crash course, and we're gonna make a part of it a responsive working reality in the browser, one that works on phones, tablets, and desktops. Now, I should point out, the target person for this video is not my usual audience. This is for absolute beginners to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, front-end development. And as such, you're probably not going to walk away a lot with this if you already really know what that stuff is and you've coded with it before. If not, this is the perfect video for you. As such, what is front-end development? What is HTML? What is CSS? And what is JavaScript? And how do these things work together? So a front-end developer is one who's able to utilize and is proficient in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And typically they'll receive a layout, perhaps from a UI UX designer that was designed in Figma or something like that. And it's their job to use coding, these technologies, to make this thing actually work in the browser, whether that be on smartphones, tablets, desktops, laptops, you name it. Now, I want you to think of HTML as your skeleton, okay? So think of it just being as the scaffolding, all right? It's scaffolding. This is what HTML actually looks like, a little snippet of HTML. Then I want you to think of CSS as being your skin, your hair, your clothes, your makeup. It styles the HTML and it can really drastically alter it in many different properties, different facets. The color, the size, animate it, you name it. And then I want you to think of JavaScript as being your brainstem, the brain, the logic, your actions. That's what gives it logic. JavaScript can give things logic and animation. It can hook into CSS, and it can do a lot of really, really cool things. And you're going to see in this demo, this crash course, exactly how all three of these technologies work together in order to create a really cool layout. Now, I should also mention, if you walk away with this interested and excited to learn something new, and you like my style of teaching, definitely check out DesignCourse.com, and specifically the CSS course, where I teach you in a much more robust and interactive custom platform at DesignCourse.com how to actually build layouts with CSS from the ground up. So this crash course, you're probably gonna walk away a little bit dizzy because there's so much information packed in such a short time. But if you really want to take it serious, check out DesignCourse.com. Top link in the description with a coupon code. I'll stop spamming you now. Let's get started.
Alrighty, so here I am in Figma, which is a UI UX design prototyping app. Now, typically as a front-end developer, someone who's working with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you'll be working with a layout that a UI UX designer will design. That might be you if you also dabble in UI UX design. And the reason we do this first, have design first in this app, this design and prototyping app, is because it's a lot faster designing the appearance of a layout or a UI in an app that's meant to be, easily handled, like they can easily handle design compared to trying to do it in code. So that's why it's always helpful and beneficial to first have the layout designed in a UI UX design app like Figma rather than just doing it at a code. And so this is the design I created, and we created in the UI UX crash course. Definitely check out that on the channel, which was uploaded a week ago. And we are only going to tackle this top portion. Believe me, this video will be long enough just tackling this, assuming that you're a beginner. And we're also going to make it work for tablet and smartphones, okay? So this is the smartphone view with the navigation, and then here's the desktop view up here. All right, so the way this works is you need a app that will allow you to code. So if you head on over to, let me get this over here, Visual Studio Code, type that in, code.visualstudio.com. This is from Microsoft. It is the most popular code editor, and guess what? It is free. So it's not a huge deal. So just download it for your OS. There's Mac OS, Linux, Windows as well. So download that, get it installed, and then open it up. It's going to look basically something like this. Now for me, I already have a project folder created. So you just go to File, Open Folder. You can create a new folder here or wherever you want to store your code projects. For me, I have one just called a folder called Proj, right? And inside of here, I already have files. So note, there are project files. So expand the description if you're watching this on YouTube and click on the project files zip file link, and then it'll show you all this stuff right here. It will also include the final code as well. So here's just some pictures. I mean, this is what this is. This is SVG graphics. There's 4 of them. And SVG is basically a graphics format that's vector. And so if you don't know what vector is, it just basically means we can scale these graphics up to any size imaginable. There won't be any pixelation like you would like with a traditional rastered photograph that you take with your camera. And then we have cat.png, which is rastered, and you can't really create something crazy like this with code exactly as you see it here. So those are the 5 files that we're starting with. So the first thing that we need to do is to create a new file. And we do that by clicking the new file button, index.html. That's the first file. That's the file that we're going to create all of our HTML inside of. And so when we do that, and you might be wondering, if you're brand new, why is it called index.html? Well, because modern web servers understand that the index.html is basically the home page. So if you go to whatever.com, it's looking at the index.html. Now, of course, there are front-end development frameworks that handle things a lot differently than this, but if we're just talking about pure, just basic code, like sometimes it's referred to as vanilla code, we're just sticking with no frameworks. We're sticking with the basics, which is the way to start. So in here, as you can see, it's empty. We have an empty button or an empty area. You may not see this where it says press blah, blah, blah to ask GitHub Copilot chat to do something. That's because I have GitHub Copilot installed as an extension. You may not have that. We're not going to really use it, so don't worry about that. What I am going to utilize is what's called an Emmet abbreviation to quickly provide us with what's called boilerplate code. And it's just the basic structure of an HTML document. Exclamation point. Notice it says Emmet abbreviation right here, then hit enter. This gives us some just starting points with our index.html, with our HTML in general. And you can see it looks kind of crazy. Don't let this freak you out. It's not that crazy. Most of this stuff is set it and forget it. The main things the 2 main areas that you're going to be working within is the head area, and you really don't work within there too much, but also with the body. Within the body tag is where all your HTML is written, okay? In here in the head, we're gonna add some stuff to that in the future. Like we can see right here, it says document title. This shows up on the browser window. So like for instance, if I get out this, well, no, maybe not that one. If I get out this, you can see right up there, interactive CSS course, where it says that. Okay, that's defined right here where it says document. So we'll just call this kitty food. Okay. Now, of course, we don't see anything because we don't yet have a server to look at what this page looks like so far. And what I want you to do, which we're going to do now, is click on extensions over here and then do a search for live server. Now, it doesn't say install because I already have it installed. And so there's a bunch of plugins that you can use. There's tons that you can use for various purposes within Visual Studio Code. But for us, this is going to be pretty good. We're at live server. Install that. After it is installed, go back to your index.html, right click and choose open with live server, or select the file over here, come down, choose go live. So when you do that, it's going to open up your default browser, whatever that is for your OS. Typically, it's either Firefox or Google Chrome these days. And this is our development server. This is just a white blank page because there's nothing in our index.html. Notice, however, it does say kitty food here. So basically, what's really cool about this is if we make a change here and we save it, it will automatically refresh this page for us so that we don't have to, which is very handy. So I have 3 monitors. I'm going to push this over here off to the side to where you can't yet see it, but we will bring this back into view when we start writing our HTML and CSS. Okay, now that we have that done, we need to really take some time to kind of discuss how we recreate that design in Figma in an intelligent manner. Okay, so in order for us to write any CSS or style anything, we first have to start with the HTML. HTML comes first. Without HTML, CSS pretty much can't do anything. For instance, one thing we can do, since we do have a bit of HTML here already, like the body tag, we can style the body tag. We could do different things with it. Right now, by default, it's white. However, if we write some CSS, and by the way, CSS can be written inline or in an external file. What that means is inline would be style. We just write a style tag, and then we start writing our CSS in here. Don't write this right now. I'm just kind of showing you what we could do. Background color for the body tag, we'll say black instead. Guess what? It's black. So you can also reference CSS through link. Now, if I just type link enter, that's an M abbreviation. It auto-completes the rest of the HTML. And this is what kind of some of the HTML looks like. And I'll kind of describe the syntax too if you're absolutely brand new. You could see that there's a lot of these tags that are called or elements. And they're started by a less than sign and then ended by a greater than sign. The element name or the tag name is right here. Here's head, HTML, meta, title, link, body. These are all HTML elements. Then we can see this orange text here. It says char set, name, content. These are attributes, all right? And they have values, equals, quotes, and these are the values. All right, so that's just a very quick rundown of the syntax structure of HTML. And you can nest things into each other, which you will see. Okay, so if we wanted to link an external file in a folder called CSS with a file called main.css, this is how we would do it in the href. Href simply means to point to another document of some sort. Now, we don't have that folder yet created, CSS. So we're going to put CSS here. So again, just to show you that, we create a new folder. This is new file. So we don't want that. We want folder. Here's our folder called CSS. Then we're going to add a file inside of it. That file we're going to call main.css. So now, if we do the same thing, body, background, black, save, guess what? It still works because the index.html knows that it's going to be reading this file. This keeps doing it this way compared to the inline version keeps your index.html file a lot cleaner. All right, so that's a very important concept to understand. So I'm going to delete that real quickly. We're not messing with CSS until we get all of our HTML done. So now let's start talking about HTML itself and what we need to do to get that layout scaffolded with correct HTML. So HTML, the way you write it, is basically how you read a book. You start from the top and then you go left to right. And now, of course, there are exceptions to that. You can put elements in different orders here, but that's how I like to tackle it personally. It just makes the most sense. So if we go up here, what is the first element? Well, it's the logo. It's this whole section. See how it's wrapped around in this little component, this little purple outline? Well, we basically kind of need to think of, when we're thinking of HTML, we need to think of structuring things in rectangles or containers. So if I hit the rectangle tool, this whole thing needs to have an HTML element that kind of keeps it all on this same row. So if I give this a stroke, by the way, you don't have to follow this. I'm just kind of doing this for visualization purposes. This needs to be an HTML element that has all this stuff nested inside of it. All right, and there's different types of HTML tags that are suitable based on what you're doing. So for instance, if I want to start here, I'm going to put in a header tag. That header tag right here is not a self-closing tag, it's a closing tag. So you have an opening version and then, not a version, you have an opening tag and then a closing tag. The only thing that's different is a /, meaning closing, we're closing this tag, or we're closing this particular rectangle in a sense, or this container. Now if we save this, nothing is going to change on our design because it's just an empty element. We haven't styled it with CSS. And this particular HTML element has no default styling that's visible. All right, so now that we have that, then we have to think in terms of more rectangles. So we had that initial rectangle. Let's duplicate this. We're going to have another one. I'll make it a little bit smaller. here's another one. And inside of this rectangle, we have 3 elements: a logo, a divider, and this little home link for people to click to get back to home real quick. And so this is all going to be inside of another container. We're going to call this container header left. Now we're going to use, I'm going to show you the slow way of typing this out, and I'm going to show you the much faster way. So, all right, let me get back here. So if I type in div and then class equals header hyphen left, here's our HTML. All right, looks pretty good, but there's a much faster way of typing this. If you're working within a div, which is basically a generic layout sort of element, and you can do a lot of stuff with it, and it's probably the element that shows up the most. It's the one that's typically used the most, and if not the most, very close to the most. A faster way of typing that is with an M abbreviation. So by default, because div is used so much, and we know we want it to have a class, all we have to do is type period and then the name of the class, header hyphen left. Now, of course, if you're brand new to this, you don't know what class means. Maybe you don't know what div means. I just describe it. It's basically a element that will help you define your layout, essentially. So it's going to act as a container, just like header is going to act as a container. And a class is an attribute on the HTML element called div, and class can be applied to any element. We can add a class here if we want. And what does that really mean? Well, really, it has 2 different purposes. A class will allow us within CSS to reference it and then style it. You don't have to have a class. We could just reference the div itself and create a rule set in CSS and style that. However, that will change every instance of div that we have throughout here. So classes are a way for you to specify and get specific with which div element or any other HTML element you want to adjust. Classes, which the name would suggest, means you can specify the same class header left in other areas, and it will still work, and it will apply to those HTML elements when you write your CSS. If you're confused still, it's probably expected if you're an absolute beginner, because really this stuff starts to make sense when I start to do it, but I did want to describe that a little bit. So now that we have header left, inside of it, the next thing we have is the logo. Because remember, the logo is right here, and then we have a divider, and then we have a little button called home. So we know that the logo, by the way, is right up here, and if you wanted to save this, you don't have to because it's a part of the project files. I already did this, but I want to show you. If you wanted to save this logo, you have to make sure you click into here and you specifically have selected the Frisky logo, right-click, copy as SVG. This will only work with graphics that you've created within Figma. You can't take, like, for instance, a photograph and save it as an SVG unless you did some type of an SVG converter, basically. But essentially, any type of thing like type or whatever that you convert to outlines, you can copy as SVG. And then when you do that, you can create a new file, name it whatever.svg, and then paste that in. So this code right here is everything it takes to make that logo. That's what the code looks like, essentially. So I'm going to delete this because I already have that saved right here as logo.svg. So we want the logo to be clickable as well. And so if we were to just put the logo like through an image tag, which is how you display images, like whether they're JPG files, GIFs, whatever, SVGs, then you use the image tag, IMG tag. Now, the IMG tag has 2 attributes that are required. The source, which is where you point it to the file, the logo.svg, just like that, and then an alt attribute. Alt attribute is not just on image tags, it's on other tags as well, or HTML elements. And the alt tag allows you to basically describe what's happening in that picture or that graphic. The reason this is important is for accessibility, because those who aren't able to see very well, they might be blind, they actually navigate websites through screen readers, they're called, and it will literally have a voice that describes what's happening in the layout. And then for this, the alt tag for this image, we're just going to say frisky logo. All right. Okay, so now we have that divider, that little 1 pixel width divider. It's like a little gray divider. And so we need to just basically specify a div element for that. So divider, period divider, that makes it a div. All right. Now, if you just wanted a div without any class, you could just type div and then enter, and that auto completion works that way as well. Now, div class divider, we'll style that in CSS. By default, we will see nothing in the browser when we put this. And then finally, also, remember how I said we want this to be clickable? If we save this and we look at the browser, we can see we have the frisky logo that's showing up right here. It is not clickable though. In order for it to become clickable, we have to nest it within another HTML element called the A element. Just hit A, hit enter, and you'll see it has one attribute called href. Href also shows up on some other HTML elements, like for instance the link element. It shows up here. And href means where should this take a person if they click on it? Well, if we want to go to Amazon.com and we take this closing A and we put it at the end so that image is now nested inside of this A tag, and we click this, guess what? We're going to Amazon. We can also send it to other pages that exist within our project. We only have index.html, but we could do subpage.html. You don't have to follow along, you just watch this part. And I could just put in subpage.html. Now I save this, and guess what? It's going to take us to the blank subpage.html. So I'm going to delete those things though, because we do not need them. I just wanted to demonstrate that. Now for us, it makes sense to make the logo go back to the home page, and that is the expected UX pattern. People expect to be able to click on links, essentially, the logo rather, and have it taken back to the home page. Now I did screw that up. This has to be updated. Let's see here, href, refresh. There we go. So now it stays at index.html when you click it. So now we have that divider, and then finally we have the home link. All right, the home link's very simple. Again, because it's a clickable button, we put it in an A element. href is going to just go nowhere. When you don't want it to go anywhere, it's a placeholder, just put a hash sign there so that when you click it, nothing happens. And then we're just going to specify home here. So now our HTML looks like this. We don't see the divider because we haven't styled it in CSS, and our home button is underneath it rather than to the side like in our design. Again, we have to achieve that with CSS. We'll worry about that stuff later. In the meantime, as we add more HTML markup here, this is going to get uglier and uglier and will look nothing like our finished design in Figma. So before we finish this part, we want to add a class here. And for this class, I'm going to do class equals home. This is going to allow me to reference this link specifically in CSS, and then you can also add multiple classes to the same class attribute. So hide-mobile. Now what does this mean? And by the way, the name I'm giving these things, you can name these whatever you want, however you want, pretty much for the most part. I'm just giving this a utility class called hide-mobile, and I'm calling it a utility class because it's just a class that you can add on to any element that you want to hide on mobile. Because if you notice, this home link in our design is not present on mobile. That's why I put that hide mobile class to it. We're going to hide this for mobile and only bring it out when we get to the tablet size. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And then also we have div class divider. We also have another one, hide mobile, there too as well, because that divider does not show up on mobile. All right, now again, even though we put hide mobile here and here, they're not hidden. We can still see the home button. Why? Because we haven't defined that CSS yet. So hang tight for that one. Now after this header left, we can now move on because we have all the HTML markup necessary for that section of the layout. Now we're going to move on to this side. All right, and again, thinking in terms of rectangles, we have to encase all this stuff in a rectangle or an element of some sort. And because this is a navigation, we can wrap it in the nav element. It's important to use these semantic HTML tags like header and nav, and there's a bunch of other ones, because for accessibility purposes, like people with screen readers, when they get to this section or navigate with their keyboard, it will inform them that this is a navigation. All right, so very important to understand this. So nav, we're going to have now. One thing that's a little bit tricky about this is if we come back to our design, we'll see we only have 4 links. However, if we get over here, we can see we also have this hamburger menu. Now, what is a hamburger menu? Well, because we lack the physical width like we have over here, look how much wider this is, we don't have enough space to put those links. So somebody taps this on their smartphone, for instance, it's going to bring out this navigation. So this item, we have to account for in this HTML. We also have to account for this little X in the HTML as well, even though they don't show up and are not present in the tablet to desktop version. They are present here in the mobile version, so you have to account for it in the HTML. We use CSS to hide this stuff and change it from this appearance to this appearance with CSS. Okay, but I always like to just get all my HTML scaffolding done before I start to tinker with CSS. There's nothing saying that you can't start writing your CSS now while you're actively writing your HTML, but that's just how I personally prefer to do it. Okay, so next up, what we're gonna do is we're going to account for this little button first, and this one. By the way, I have these already saved. Right click, copy as SVG. I already did that for us in the project file. So we have menu.svg and we also have close.svg. Let me delete this file. Okay. So what we're going to do here is it's going to be clickable, that little hamburger menu. So what do? We put A. And inside of there, we're just going to put a hashtag. We're going to give it a class. And we're going to give it a class of menu-open and hide-desktop, because we don't want this to show up on desktop, only on tablet and the phones. So now, menu open, by the way, you'll see how this, I created the class specifically, or I designated this class menu open specifically because in a little bit we'll use JavaScript to reference this class specifically so that we can gain access to this button and listen to a click event in order to attach another CSS rule set that will reveal that menu that slides out on the phone. Okay, so inside of here we put our image. Source equals menu.svg, which is the hamburger menu, and we're going to say open menu for the alt attribute. Now if we save this, we should see the little menu right down there. You click it, nothing happens, again, because of the hash sign. So after that, we're going to start our unordered list. Now, what is a UL? Well, it's an acronym for unordered list. And this has an opening and closing tags that we can nest what are called list items inside of them. An unordered list is perfect for like a navigation like this. So if we go back here, what is this? This is a list. It's a horizontal navigation. And so each one of these are a list item. And so we specify list items in the form of an acronym LI like this. All right, so each of our elements are also clickable. What do we do when they're clickable? We put in a link, okay? So I'm gonna put A here, and then, that's not gonna go anywhere. And then inside of there, I'm gonna put an image. Now you're wondering, wait, there was no images in that navigation. But yes, young grasshopper, you are incorrect. If you look over here, we have an image. It is this close button that's going to be a part of our unordered list. Okay, we're just going to hide this using CSS to hide it from tablet and desktop. Okay, so that's why the first one is that image. So then inside of here, we're going to specify image source equals close.svg to close it, and then we're going to say close menu. All right, so we're also going to give this a class though. This one's going to be menu, and this is going to be -close. So notice we have menu open and menu close. Again, you can name this whatever you want, like butthead open. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm just letting you know you can name it whatever you want. So menu open, menu close, and then we're going to specify the next 4 list items. So li, a, hashtag, because we don't have actual sub pages. Typically, you know, if this was like an about us page, we would put like about.html or something like that. But we don't have that. This is just a quick demo for a landing page. This is going to be our food. And then, quick tip here in Visual Studio Code, Shift Alt down will allow you to replicate that line. Very cool. Ingredients. This here is going to be studies. This here is going to be FAQ for frequently asked questions. And that is it for the header. So this is what the entire header markup looks like right here. I know it's a lot and it's kind of complex because we need to hide and show things. So don't let it discourage you too much though, because we're going to get this rocking soon. So this is what you should look like in your browser. It should look like in your browser at this point. It looks very ugly. We can see some default styling that we're going to have to remove, like these little dots and stuff like that with CSS. So continuing on, if we go back to our page here, what is next after this section? Well, it's this section. It's this headline, starting from top and then left to right. So it's this headline right here. There's a sub headline right here, and then there's a call to action button. A call to action, acronym CTA, is a term that you're going to hear if you're working in this field, whether you're a UI UX designer or a front-end developer. And a call to action simply means what it suggests. It's a call to action. You want somebody to click something, a button is a call to action. This is a call to action. This is our primary call to action. So it's styled a lot differently. It's larger, it's different, it's a primary color. It's the thing that you want person to do most. That's your primary call to action. So let's go ahead and write the markup for that stuff. So for that stuff, I'm gonna put, and that, by the way, that is called the hero section typically. The hero section is comprised of a headline, a call to action, maybe a description like this, maybe 2 calls to action, maybe like a secondary button. And then we usually an illustration or a photograph or something of some sort. So we're going to wrap this in a semantic tag called main. This is our main content. And inside of there, we're going to have our H1. So heading elements, they come in H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in order of importance. And the browser will style these default based on which one you choose. H1 is pretty much the most important element. So it's going to be bigger. So I'm going to type in, your cat will go bonkers. Now, if I save that, look how large this is compared to like this text. It still isn't that big. It's not how big we need it. We need it to be much larger, which we will fix. But notice how it says just bonkers here, but in our design, it's actually weird. This is kind of an image. I took text or right-clicked and I flattened it. When you flatten it, it converts it to like SVG. And then that way I was able to take each character and rotate them to make it look interesting. So I already saved that as bonkers.svg right here. So what we want to do, instead of just writing out bonkers, because we want to have that cool way of doing it, we put an image embedded within the H1 element. So this is going to be bonkers.svg, and then we'll just say text that says bonkers. Okay. So now that we have that, that's all good to go. We'll see this text, that pictures now. It doesn't look good. That's okay though. And then now we have the description underneath it. I'll copy that. We're going to do a paragraph with a class of subhead. So I'm going to put P period subhead. That's an M abbreviation, and that creates this when we hit enter. All this extra type that we don't have to specify. So paragraph's a new element that you haven't seen yet. It has opening tag and closing tag, and what goes in beside of it is the actual text or the paragraph, just like that. Now to make this more readable, because right now we have to scroll all the way off, you could do this. And this would be entirely acceptable. HTML, it will ignore, and the browser will ignore this extra white space. It will not include that. So if we save it, you'll see it's just the one line of text right here. Next up, we also have the primary call to action underneath it. It's a link, so ahref, going nowhere. Class, we're going to say primary -cta, and then the text inside of it. And in this case, it's called anchor text. Get bonkers. Save it, go back. It's going to look ugly. It will look nothing like our big orange button in our design. Again, that comes in CSS. Next up, the only other element that we're going to be focusing on is just this big circle, and then this kitten, which was generated with Midjourney AI. And so for that, we're going to come right, let's see here, right here, and we're going to specify a cat container. So we're going to hold all three of those elements inside of cat container, and also cat. All three of those elements go in here, but I'm nesting this overall element inside of this element. You'll see how this element comes into play when we get to CSS, and you'll see the importance of it. So we're going to do image source equals, and we're going to start the cat first, cat.png. Alt is going to be cat illustration. And so after that, we have the two circles, the inner and the outer. So we're going to use a div for this with a class called inner-circle. And again, I can hit enter, and it's going to know to put div because div's the most frequently used. You could also do div dot and then inner circle, or let's do outer circle. And that works just the same, but why write div when it'll do it for us? So now we have an inner and outer circle. And guess what? That is almost all of our HTML. We have one more, and I want to wrap everything. All the HTML we wrote, we're going to wrap this in a parent div element called wrap. All right. Some people call it wrapper. Some people call it container. I call it wrap. All right. So inside a wrap, the reason I have this is because we're going to use this element to give it margin of white space away from the edges of the viewport, which is a fancy way of saying the device screen or the browser window or something like that. So you'll see how this all works here in a second. So you should be probably, at this point, you're still confused. You're not sure how all this stuff works. This is what it looks like. This looks absolutely nothing like this, right? It doesn't. Well, that's where this power of CSS comes into play. Now that our HTML is done, we're going to switch gears and focus on CSS. All right, so for our CSS, I want to show you what a rule set looks like. So you start off with a rule set, and everything's about rule sets essentially. And here's the structure of a rule set. Notice that if we go back to our HTML, the very first element we have outside of this stuff is the body element. All right, we can style the body element. We can also style the HTML element, but I pretty much stick with the body element. And in doing so, let me get this back up. I should not have done that. There we go. And in doing so, we can specify the actual tag name as the selector. All right, so you start off by defining a rule set by specifying the selector. The selector is just saying which HTML element or elements, multiple, do we want to style. So for us, we just want to do the body. Now there can only be one body tag, so you can't style multiple body tags. So this will only apply to this element right here. And we're starting with that one because this is where you specify the website background color, or if there's a background image, or if there's a video background or whatever. Although, can you do a video background on the actual, well, whatever. I've been doing this for like 25 years and there's still stuff I don't know because I haven't tried it yet. So we're just going to specify the next thing. And by the way, you open up after the selector. This is the selector. You open it up inside of these squiggly braces. This whole thing is right now it's called a rule set. And then inside of here though, but it doesn't do anything because we haven't specified properties. You have a property name and then property values. So for us, I want to change the background color because the background color of the design is not white. It's something else. So we specify a property name. There are so many CSS properties. There's a lot to learn, and remember, this one's called background color for changing the background color. And then after you specify a property called background color, you hit a colon. That basically ends the property name, all right? And then after that goes the value, property value. So our value, what is the background color? Well, we go back to the design, we click on the main frame right here, and then we come over here to fill. Notice how, if I get the color picker up, it's not completely white. It's a little bit like beige, okay? So this is the color code for that color. It's called hex color code. It's 6 characters, which could be letters and numbers. FFFBF3. We copy that code, we go back, we put a hash sign first, and paste it in, and then enter it with we end it with a semicolon. Has to be a semicolon. If we save this and we go back and we look at our design, we can see we have this beige color now. It might be hard to tell because it's close to white. So there's also different ways of specifying color. So for instance, if we know we want it to be just absolute blue, like a primary blue, we can type blue. Just like that. Looks horrible. We can also, if we go back, notice how there's this little square. If you hover over this in Visual Studio Code, we can now change the color over here. We will not have to worry about. Notice how the hex values are changing rapidly because there's so many of them. We can go to different colors over here and choose one and be like, okay, that's our background. Let's make people's eyes bleed. So let's go back to that FFFBF3, and there we go. Next up, a rule set. So real quickly, just go back over that. A rule set is this whole thing. This is the selector. You can have multiple elements to select. So like if you want to style all the div elements as having a background color of that color, you could do that as well. And there's also other ways we can do interesting selectors. We can specify just a class, like whatever, and that's how you specify the selectors. So body there, that's good. We can also have multiple properties in a rule set, and in fact, that's pretty typical. So we're going to specify another one called margin. So by default, before I specify this and save it, if you look at our design, and I zoom up here, you see there's a little bit of white space around here. Like this text is not touching the edge of the browser. That's because the browser, by default, adds a certain amount of margin. Margin is a CSS property that allows you to define white space around on the outside of an element. So what we could do is say margin 0. I like to reset that, and we will control our own margin. Now there's 0 margin. I like doing this for controlling my own margin with the overall wrap classer right there. Now, another thing is if you look at the original design, look at this type. It's a font called Inter. All right. Now, notice this is what's called a sans serif font. It's not one of those fonts that have things hanging off. Those are called serif fonts, like newspaper fonts or Times New Roman or something like that. However, the default font that a browser will give situations here in your layout is a serif font. We don't want that. So we need a way to change this font. So Google Fonts, if I get up a new window here, fonts.google.com have a ton of different fonts that you can choose from. One of the fonts is Inter. If I type in Inter, click on it, and we click over here, you want to add Inter. This is a variable font. Now, variable fonts are relatively new, but they allow you to really fine-tune the thickness of a given font. So if we click on this, or if we go back here and we choose Get Embed Code, we can just click Copy Code here. Be wary though, variable fonts, they can be a little bit heavier in file size, and typically when you have weights, you don't want to include every single weight because that's going to be a higher file size. But for this demo, it's going to be fine. We want to copy this right here. Notice it says embed code in the head of your HTML. That's that part of the code that you typically don't really touch too much except to do stuff like import fonts. So above the main.css, that line right there, we're going to paste all that stuff in. Now I'll go ahead and get this tabbed up just so it looks better. And that's what this looks like right here. Now if we save this, nothing's going to happen because we're only downloading it. We haven't specified it in CSS yet, and that's what we do right here. We can specify the font family property, colon, value, enter. Now we had to do this because enter is not a font that ships on all devices. So the font has to be downloaded. And so once it's downloaded, and we put this before our main.css, then we'll have access to the font family called enter. So now if we save this, we're not going to have that old school looking lawyer type. We have this type, the type that's consistent with our design. Okay, so another thing I want to do is we have a class like hide mobile, utility classes, hide desktop. I like to put this stuff in the top of my HTML, like at the very top. And so I'm going to put hide, period, hide mobile, because it's a class. That's how you reference a class in CSS. In HTML, you reference a class by specifying the class attribute equals and then a name, header left. In this case, hide mobile. The way you reference that in CSS is you put a period, hide hyphen mobile, and then open it up. Now you're probably wondering why do we have to put why can't we just do this? Well, because we did it with body. Well, hide mobile is not an HTML element. It's simply a class that we specified in the class attribute right here. It's not one of these. So you can also specify another element called ID. An ID has to be unique. You can't put multiple IDs of the same value on elements. Now, typically IDs are used for communicating with JavaScript. You don't have to use them, but I'm just letting you know that's an option. If you do use ID and want to reference it in HTML, it's with the hash sign, hide mobile. If I had specified, ID equals, hide mobile or whatever. Okay. So now that we have hide mobile, all we have to do is just specify, and notice my code completion knows what I want to do, display none. So that means that on mobile, this is going to hide any element that has the class of hide mobile. So I've saved it. So you're not going to see a difference with div class divider because we haven't styled that yet and there's no styling in it anyways. However, our home button will be disappeared when I get the browser out. It will be gone and it is not there. It was typically under there. And just to prove it to you, I'll move this over here and I will say, I'll just get rid of it here. Here's our home. Get it? All right, so hopefully that makes some sense there. Okay, so we added it back. And one extremely important thing I want to talk about is mobile first CSS. So we are writing what's called mobile first CSS. What that means is if I go back to our design, everything that I'm going to design right now initially with my CSS is going to be geared towards making it look good on a mobile device first, not a desktop device first. Some people do desktop first. That's okay, but I prefer to do mobile first. So what this means is I want to get that browser in an orientation that looks kind of like this, like a mobile browser window. So I'll do that right now. I can go ahead, here, let's just move this. I'll go ahead and take this. We don't want it maximized anymore. And then I'm going to take our code preview and I'm going to get it into the rough size of a smartphone. This cat is just killing me. So now I'm going to move this over. There we go. I'll do the same thing with our Figma window too, so that's always in view. There we go. Okay. It is helpful to have multiple monitors. I have 3, but because I can only record one screen, we have to do it like this. So right now, this obviously looks nothing like this over here. And that's our goal. We want to make this look like this first. And then use what are called CSS media queries, or you could use container queries, which we're not going to get into in this video. It's a relatively new way of approaching responsive design. But basically, we're going to use media queries to progressively enhance this and make adjustments to the layout as this window expands to simulate other devices. Like this is a tablet, desktop, laptop out here, smartphones around here. And that's how I like to do it first. Our goal is to get this to look like this here first. So now the next thing we need to worry about concerning the actual CSS is the top section up here. All right, so there is one more utility class though I did want to get to, and that is hide desktop. So for hide desktop, actually we don't even designate that right here. We do that in a media query, the desktop media query. So never mind that. I do want to specify our wrap, and again, our wrap is the element that wraps around everything. And again, I want to use that to define the white space because this does not look good where it's hanging up off the top of the screen. So I'm going to do a margin of 2 em units. Notice now we have all this empty white space all around. So what is margin? So margin is a CSS property that allows you to define the white space on the outside of an element. In fact, you can see what this looks like if you use your browser's dev tools. So on Chrome, Firefox, I believe on Edge, you hit F12 and you get this window that shows up. And it may show up at the bottom of your screen. You can dock these in different areas by clicking this button. And we want to click on to elements. And then this specifically, this little button right here, the selector. If you do this, you start to hover over. You can do this on any web page you want. It'll show you information about the CSS, and this is called your developer tools. It's one of the many things you can do here in this very robust setting. And so if I click over here on top of this Frisky image, but we come over here into the elements view, or click on rather the wrap, notice all of the orange stuff around it, how it shows orange all around the corners. Well, that is the margin. All right, it's very interesting. You see the margin right there. It says wrap, or it says margin 2 em units. All right, so that's how you specify white space. It's on the outside. Padding works on the inside. We'll get to that later. And so another thing that's important is what is 2em, right? If you've never seen that before, it's probably confusing. Well, these are two different things. 2 is a value, em is a CSS unit. Now, there are a bunch of different types of CSS units. If I type in CSS units in Google, we'll find a CSS units page, and it will tell you the 2 different types of units that we have, absolute lengths and relative lengths. Absolute lengths are basically these values right here. Pixels are the most commonly used. There are a few other ones that could be used. And these basically means they're fixed. They will stay that size. Relative is a little bit different, and there's a lot of them too. You could see em, which we just used. We could see rem, which we can use as well. And you can really go down the rabbit hole of all of these in terms of trying to figure out which ones are, the most obvious. For margin and padding, I typically use em units, okay? Now, let's also work on the rest of this. Let's go ahead and close this. Bring this out. Let's close this. Let's go back. If we look at our design, we will see that on mobile, this hamburger menu should be on the same row to the right of the browser. This is not to the right, right? Correct. It's underneath it. So we need to look at our markup in our index.html, and we see we have header left. All right, and we also have header. So if we look at these 2 elements, we have the logo right here. Again, that's this logo. Then we have the hamburger menu underneath. The hamburger menu is actually right here. This clickable link, and here's the menu.svg. The parent container of these elements, the same parent that houses both of these elements, is the header element. Yeah, they're nested within header left. This one is, and this one's nested within a nav element. But it's also, its other parent is header, and that's the same parent that these both share because they're both nested within. They're also both nested within wrap. So what we want to do is we want to specify the parent element, and that parent element of header again, it has these elements to work with. If we want to transition these from things that stack on top of each other, instead that are things that are in columns next to each other, we can specify display flex. Now notice how it moved right there to the side. That's what we want, but we want it to go all the way. So another companion property to display flex is justify content, space between. Now, another real quick tip, whenever you're specifying a CSS property name, right before you hit the colon, it'll show you all the possible properties that can be used. So for us, we want to do justify content space between. So that's going to push these elements away from each other to the right. Now, why isn't it going out here? That's because of the existence of this element right here. Don't follow along with this, but if I were to take, for instance, nav and display none, or wait, not nav, let me choose the right thing. Yeah, UL. Take our unordered list. That is hidden, and this goes where it should be, right exactly where it should be. And guess what? It's responsive too. So if I move this, it'll stay at space between. Very cool. So we don't want to actually hide that navigation that way. We're going to hide it in a different way shortly. So we want to remove that. So now let's focus on styling this right here. And we want it to look like this. We have our work cut out for us. I mean, because this right here does not look like this right here. It has a white background. It goes all the way from top to bottom. They're bigger. It's just way better looking. It doesn't have these little circles. So now we have our work cut out for us, all right? What we're going to do is, for this selector, we want to select the unordered list, right? So we could just do this. UL and open it up. However, most websites have multiple unordered lists on the same page. There could be like a footer navigation. There could be just maybe a list of features or something like that. And if you specify stylings in here, it's going to affect them all. Well, we only wanted to affect this one. So another way of specifying it is we could give it a class, like class equals primary nav, and then just reference that. Or we can select a parent, nav ul. All right, so we could just say nav ul right there. Awesome. So now it's only going to affect any nav elements that exist within, or ul elements that exist within the nav element. So if you did have another nav with an unordered list, it would affect that. If you only wanted to be certain that you only style this one, you could do the class way as well. This isn't going to be a problem for us because we only have one nav element with one UL element. Okay, now inside of here, what's the obvious thing that we can start to do? Background. We can change that to white. The order of the properties, by the way, inside of your rule sets do not matter. So background white, and notice how I didn't use a hex code. If you're using, absolute color values like white, you can just specify white. Very simple. Now if we look over here, it's only this tiny little area that's white. It's not all the way up and down. That's because we need to specify some other properties. So to do this, to get this, if we look at this over here, this nav is just laid right on top of everything. We need to break outside of the traditional, what's called the box model. All right, so the way we can do that, one of the ways is position fixed. Position fixed, notice when we save this, it kind of shifts over. Basically means we can position this with the CSS properties of top, right, bottom, left, anywhere we want. So top 50%. All right, well, guess what? It's 50% down the page and it's hanging over this kitten. We could do left 5 pixels. So it's 5 pixels away from the edge. Very, very cool, very, very handy. And because it's position fixed, and by the way, this can have multiple position types. So position absolute, we use this a lot. Fixed, relative, static, sticky. So there's basically 5 different acceptable values. Fixed we want to use for this type of navigation because it will stay fixed in the browser. If you scroll down, it will not move. We want it fixed. That's how a navigation should behave like that, like on a smartphone. Now we also want to do a z-index. of high, like 999. Z-index is a value that can be placed on elements that have a position of fixed, absolute, whatever, and it's a stacking order. So things can stack and physically layer on top of each other. You want your navigation to be the element that just sits on top of everything. All right, so just to be safe, I just put it at a high value. You don't have to, but it doesn't hurt to do it either. So we just want to be sure that nothing overlaps that, because for instance, you don't have to follow along. If I do like a left of 30%, notice how it's currently on top of. Well, if I take and put this to -1, guess what? It's behind our elements. We don't want that. We want something high. Okay, so now we want this position on the upper right corner, just like this is, upper right. So, or the top right. So we say top 0, right 0. Okay, now it's there. We also want it to have a height that is 100% of the viewport height. So what I'm going to do is specify height 100 VH, viewport height. That's another unit. All right, so we're making some progress. We're getting there. I'm also going to specify a margin of 0, because browsers by default on unordered lists will add a margin. That's what that was. So if I remove that again, notice that there's a little bit of white margin up here. We want to remove that, so we're going to add margin 0, and now it's at the top. We're getting there. Now, we don't want those little dots next to each list item, so list style none. All right, guess what? It got rid of them. You could also put list style type none as well. Now, I'm going to specify a width. And if you look at the width here, it's like 33% or so, maybe 40%. So width 40%. Now I just scaled it out to 40. Also notice that the text is way off. So if I go back to our design, we need to right align this text. Notice how it's all right aligned. This is left aligned. What we can say is text hyphen align left, or right, sorry. There it is. So, but there's no white space around it, so we have to add margin, but not margin, padding. Remember how I said margin works on the outside of elements? Padding, it does the same thing, except it works on the inside of that element. So we need white space on the inside of this UL element. And so to do that, we simply say padding 2M. There we go. See how I moved it away from the inside? Very, very cool. If you look at this at the developer tools, the way we did, we would hover over them. Well, margin shows up as being orange, that orange color, and then padding will show up, I believe, as green. In fact, I cannot even remember right now. So F12, if I hover over this, yep, it's green. So you can see if we hover over unordered list, it's showing us the padding value. Let's go back. There we go. Now we have to make this type larger and looking better. Notice how much rule sets here. Again, it doesn't matter if I put right above, top. The order of these do not matter at all. Okay. Now, they could matter in terms of readability. If you kind of want to group certain properties that are similar to each other, you can do that too. Now, another thing we need to do, and this is going to be a new concept, is within CSS, with modern CSS, we can actually nest rule sets within each other. So for instance, if we want to style and gain access, say for instance, to each of the list items to give some white space around it, because these are real close together, we can specify right here li. And notice how it's nested within this rule set. So nav, ul, and then the li. Again, this gains access to nav, ul, li, each one of these li's, these list items. All right, so now what we'll do is switch back to our CSS, and we're going to give it some margin, 1em0. Okay, so it's spread them out. So the margin, this looks a little strange, right? Why is it 1em with a 0 value? Well, margin's a really powerful property because there's multiple ways that you can specify values. We could just do 1em. This means it's going to add 1em all around top right, bottom left, top right, bottom left of each one of these. And if you only wanted to specify maybe 1em on the top and bottom, you just put 1em and then a 0. The 0 means 0 on right and left. This means 1em on the top and bottom. We save it, and it got rid of the left and right margin. So you can also specify all 4 corners. So if we wanted to do 1em on the, and it works like a clock. So top is the first value, right is the second value. So if we want to do like 4em over there, we could do that. Bottom is the third value, put 1em there, and then left is the final value, which we could put like 0. So notice how it's shifted way over because we added a lot of left margin here. We don't actually want to do that. The final code is 1em 0. Okay, now we also want to, if we look at our design, notice how there's a lot more empty white space between our food and this button compared to these. In fact, if I just hover over these, you see it says 27, although it might be really hard to see 27 there. There's 27 pixels between these versus 51 on this one. So we need extra margin. So this next part might be a little bit confusing, but we have to find a way to gain access specifically to this list item. Ooh, I messed up my CSS or my HTML. Yeah, I completely did not see that. This is a no-go. This should be closed. Ah, there we go. And then this shift in tab will get rid of an indent. That's how this is supposed to be. That was my bad. Okay, we couldn't really tell in there, but that would definitely be a bad problem. So we have a list item with an A inside of it with an image inside of that. Okay, so we need a way to target this. We could give it a class and name it first li, right? And then just target that. But there's a better way because we could do it without adding any extra type. And that is through a pseudo selector. So what we can do is inside of here we can nest and then put a colon, nth of type, and open up in parentheses and 1. Margin bottom 2em. Save it, and now it's pushed it down further. So a couple things happened here. We have our pseudo selector of and nth of type 1. What this means, because we nested it within the list item, it means the first time this list item shows up, or the first item, the first list item, 1. Or we could specify 2. If we do 2, notice how it pushes margin bottom down here. So that's a very cool, efficient way of specifying, certain elements like within an unordered list. Now, notice how it says margin bottom. So if you only want to specify margin on one of the 4 directions, you can put margin top, margin hyphen bottom, margin hyphen left, margin hyphen right. That's how that works. Okay, now we need to style our actual text. And this text is found within these A elements. The A elements are nested within the list item, so we can just put it A right here. We're going to do color black. That's how you change text color, because default hyperlink color on websites is blue, but if you click them and you visit them, it turns to that previous purple color. We're also going to make text hyphen decoration none. That will get rid of the underlines. They don't have that line underneath them anymore. Font weight is going to be bold. And then we're also going to change font size. The default size is 1em, which is equal to 16 pixels. So I'm going to change it to 1.2 rem, which is a responsive em units. Now I'm not going to go into what the difference is between em and rem. I have other videos for that, and this is a crash course. I want to keep on rocking along. So typically for me, font sizes are rem, margin and padding and stuff like that are em. Okay, so continuing on, I'm going to put an hover here. This is a very cool selector, because it means if any of these 8 elements are hovered, then we're going to change styles here in some way, shape, or form. So we can change this maybe to the orange color. I have reference codes. That's how I know what that is. So if I hover over this, look at that. Isn't that cool? One thing to note though, you want to make sure this isn't too bright and that it has a WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, contrast ratios above a certain level. So what am I talking about? If I drag this over and we get out F12 and we click on this, you're going to see we hover over it. It says contrast is 21. And that's for accessibility purpose. That's because this is black on a white background. It's the maximum contrast you can get. This is completely readable. It's the most readable thing you can get. But if I change that color, the main colors up here, to this, and we hover over them, look at this. Contrast is only 1.93, and it has a warning sign. It's basically telling us that this is not contrasting well in order to adhere to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. And that's what's used to kind of define accessibility. You know, some people don't have great eyesight, so they may not be able to see or read some of this text as well. Font size is a consideration and all this. And so I would definitely say research the WCAG contrast. Of course, I have videos on my channel as well. I have 1,200 videos, or probably close to 1,300 on all these very niche topics. Okay, so let's get rid of that. It's back up there. And what you would want to do, since this is too light, you could just get the color picker and maybe choose something that's a bit darker. Now, you don't always have to change the color either. You could do something like text decoration, and we could do underline, which is bringing it back. So if I hover over this, guess what? Well, let's get out of this here for a second. We now have underlines. Very cool. And it's just like a nice way to, you know, show that you're currently selected on something. Now, when it comes to hover on a mobile application like this, do you have hover on a smartphone? Like, can your smartphone detect when your finger's hovering? No. So in the context of a mobile navigation, it doesn't really make sense to do this unless for some reason somebody has a browser like this on their computer. And so it kind of makes sense in that regard. Now, one thing that I kind of do want to modify is probably make these bigger, because remember, this is going to be showing up on a phone and you want this to be, you know, considerably bigger. So 1.5 M, that looks pretty good right there. You might want to space these out even more with maybe like 2 M units. And then, oops, I don't know what the heck happened there. There we go, 2 M units. And then we can probably space this out to like 4. There we go. Okay. So that is it for the actual design of our navigation for mobile. And if we look at it, it's pretty darn close. Very, very close. This is zoomed up a lot, so of course it's kind of looking strange. But yeah, this is very close. So now the next step is we need to hide this thing, because by default, when somebody opened this up on a phone, the navigation shouldn't be out here, right? We need to hide it. So the way we're going to hide it is not through display none like we did before, but rather through a different way. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to take this unordered list, because that's this whole white thing. It contains all this stuff. At the bottom, it doesn't matter where, I'm just going to choose to put it at the bottom. We're going to put transform, translate, X, and we're going to put 100%. Save it, and it goes bye-bye. What this did is the transform property, we specified translate X, and that means we're going to move it on the x-axis horizontally 100%. And that pushes it all the way off. If we do maybe 30%, you're going to see just 30% of it. 100% pushes it off the viewport so that we don't see it. And then we can use what's called JavaScript to make it come back if somebody clicks on this little button or they tap on it. And so we're going to switch gears right now. I'm going to show you how to do that. This is the only time we're going to touch JavaScript in this little crash course. And I just want to get it out of the way. And it can be confusing for a beginner. I would definitely say focus on learning HTML and CSS first But I did want to include just a little bit of JavaScript just for the fun of it, just to show you how these things all work. So the way to do this is go to your HTML. We're going to write inline JavaScript, meaning it's going to be JavaScript that we write inside of the HTML. Just in the same way we could do CSS up in the head. And you can, of course, link another JS file just like we did with the CSS file. But because this is so little, I'm just going to put this at the bottom. We're going to do inline. So this next part is going to be very confusing, especially if you never touch JavaScript. Don't let it concern you too much. This is a crash course. Confusion and anxiety and stress are expected. That's what a crash course does. So in order for this to work, we really just need to boil this down to the basic parts. Think about this in simple terms. What do we want to happen? When somebody clicks on this little hamburger menu, we want to then bring back out or change that translate X property to 0 where it was by default. So we need access to that nav UL element in our JavaScript so that we can change its CSS properties. We also need access to this element, and we also need access to the close button because we have to listen to when somebody clicks on that in order to push it back out to 100%. So we need 3 things. We need to define a variable that will house or basically contain a reference to our nav unordered list right here. So the way we do this is we define the type of variable first. In this case, we're going to say a constant, which is const, and we're going to say menu. This is the name of it. Now, this could also be a let, meaning if we needed to change this value in the future, we could do that. But since we don't need to change it, we're just going to make it a constant. And so then this is going to be the name of it, menu. We can name it whatever we want, equals. And then we have to gain access to it. Document.query selector, in parentheses, in quotes, nav UL. Just the same way we did the selector in CSS. Now we're going to shift alt down 2 times because we need 2 others. We're going to do menu button btn. Notice how I also chose to specify these values because there's 2 different words, menu button, close button. In JavaScript, we use what's called camel case. The first word is always not capitalized, and the second word and any words after are going to be capitalized. So menu, button, stuff like this. That's what it looks like. It's just a convention. Don't ask me why. That's how it is. So close button, we need to query selector. We have to gain access to the class. And what is that called? It's called menu open. And it's attached to this HTML element up here, menu-open. We need to do same thing with the close button. This is menu-close. And again, we put the little class sign there, just like in CSS. Doing this and defining these does nothing. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make it work. We just gain access to these through JavaScript. So now what we can do is we can say menu.btn.add event listener. Open it up in a parentheses. The first parameter is the type of event. There are a bunch of different types of events in JavaScript that it can listen for in the add event listener. So we can do, let's see here. We can do, my brain is farting right now and I'm not thinking. Oh, yeah. So we can do JavaScript event types. Event reference. There's a lot. So like the one that we were using, click. Am I looking at the right thing? I don't think I am. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm just looking for a list. Maybe I just put JavaScript events. Maybe listener. So it's going to, down here somewhere, I'm hoping there will be a list of the various events that you can have. This is stupid. Like, why is this so difficult to find all the different list events? So let's see here. I'm going to type in, list out all of the JavaScript events you can use in add event listener. Okay. So this is one of those things. I decided to include this. I could have just scrap this part of the video out because I was screwing around trying to find something I couldn't find. But you're going to find that when you are working with code, even if you've been doing this for 25 years, that you're going to have issues. And so ChatGPT is a great way. It's a great way just to answer your questions about this type of stuff, and code specifically too. So we can choose right here, mouse events, click, double click, mouse down, mouse up. These are all different events that we can listen to. And there's a bunch of it. It is still going. It's awesome. So with that said, we want a click event. And inside of here, the next part, this is called an arrow function, and we just open it up within squiggly braces. All right, so this simply means if somebody clicks on menu button's defined here, which means it's attached to this class, menu open. Where is menu open? Right here. It's the A element that's wrapped around this image right up here. All right, and we can say, if somebody clicks, then do something in here. We could say console.log, hell yeah, exclamation point. Well, what happens there? So a console log is something for developers to use. So if you hit F12, get the developer tools out and click console right here, notice we have this little blinking cursor. If I click this, hell yeah, I keep on clicking it, look at that. Now we know when that button's been clicked. So instead of console logging, we can actually do something. We can say menu.class_list.add open. Okay, so what is happening here? So menu's defined right here, the nav UL, right? And notice it says class list, and we want to add a class to it called open. It would be literally the same thing as doing this. So if we find our nav UL right here, and we typed in class open, that is what's going to happen dynamically with the help of JavaScript when somebody clicks this. So class is a CSS, class is a CSS thing. So it's attaching this class name to that element. But we don't have currently an element called open. So underneath here, we're going to create a class called open, and we're going to take transform and we're going to set it to translate x 0. What this will do is override the translate x 100 right here, because again, this is on navul, but we're adding a class onto navul that will override that. So if we save it and click it, guess what? It shows up. Isn't that amazing? Now it doesn't slide out smoothly, right? Well, correct, it doesn't. I want it to slide out. That's where another property called transition comes into play. We add it on the element that we want to animate, and we want to specify transition colon, and then what CSS property do we want to transition? We want to transition transform for a duration, maybe like 0.5 seconds, 0.5 s, and then we want to give it some type of animation easing of some sort. Now easing, now by default, if we leave this off, I believe it will be linear, meaning it's gonna come out at the same rate. Now I could be wrong about that, because it does appear to kind of slow down at the end. But if we do ease in and out, we'll see if I refresh and click it again, it kind of didn't change. But you can do some pretty crazy cubic Bezier stuff, which is another kind of advanced way of specifying the timing of the animation throughout this 0.5 second duration. So like, what's that one do? I don't even know. Oh, it kind of like bounces it out. So you can do some pretty cool things with the animation. We'll just use ease in out. And now when we click it, it slides in for a duration of 0.5 seconds. Of course, we can make this take 5 seconds if we wanted to, which would be really stupid and bad for user experience, but it'll work. So let's do 0.5. And that's the write speed. So now let's get the close button work so that it can go back when somebody taps on that. So we go back here. We're going to take this, copy it, those 3 lines, paste it. This is going to be close BTN, add event lister of click. And then what do we want to do here? We want to essentially remove it. So remove open, the open class. Just don't put a period here like you do typically, because we're saying this is a class, it's inferred, so we just put the class name. So now we click this, click it back, and it goes back and forth. Look at that, we have a fully functioning mobile navigation. Awesome. Okay, now that we have that done, we can go ahead now and start focusing on other areas of the design. And the next area is going to be this stuff. If we look at our reference code, we'll see that on mobile, because we're doing mobile first, this stuff is all centered. This is left aligned. So let's go back in our CSS at the bottom, and we're going to specify H1 and the paragraph. Why? Because we want them both to be aligned to text align center. So notice how they're now both centered, and it says text align center, and we used multiple selectors. You can do this, and it's something that you should do if you have elements that share similar properties. Now we can also say H1 in and of itself, because we have some things that are specific to this H1 element alone and not the paragraph element. And so the first thing we want to do is I'm going to do a margin top of 3M, because it's way too close to the logo and the navigation. This gives it some nice needed white space. Next up, we're going to take the image. If I expand this out, notice how it does this. We do not want that. We want it to stay at the bottom. So there is an IMG element within that H1 element. So if I find the H1 right here, Control B to get rid of that sidebar, you can see the image element for a bonkers text. So IMG here, and we're going to say display block and margin 0 auto. Now margin 0 auto works with display block on these type of properties to center it. All right, I don't want any margin on the top and bottom, but auto on the left and right centers it. All right, so it's one of those patterns that you just have to remember. So it keeps it centered no matter what. All right, next up, we're going to make this a little bit larger and separate the lines of text out, because these two lines are pretty close. CSS gives us control over that stuff. So what we'll do is, let me see here. Oh, okay. I guess, this was not in my reference code, so I'm just going to do this on the fly. We're just going to do font size, slightly larger than its default 1M size, maybe 1.2 rem. Notice how it got a little bit bigger. And then we're also going to do line hyphen height. And let's try 1.5, which is suggested, and that kind of separates things out a little bit more. Now, finally, we have the get bonkers text. This looks nothing like the button here. So we have ourselves a little bit of work to do. We're going to take our primary CTA class, or sometimes, notice if we go over here to our primary CTA right here, it's an A element. You can also specify A, like the element name, dot primary CTA. Either will work. And then we're going to do background, and we want to get that background color. Again, we go back, we select it, we can see fill, FF8 800, go back, put the hash sign, end it with a semicolon, and now we have this. Now remember, padding. Padding is white space on the inside. There's no white space. It looks horrible. So we're going to do padding 1M unit, padding all around it of 1M. Then we're going to do a width. If we do 100%, it's not going to work, because we have to do with text like a hyperlink display block, just like we had to do display block to center this element. It's just one of those things you're just going to have to remember. It's not a huge deal. Now the problem with this is extending all the way, it's extending out further. Notice it doesn't have, it has this white space here, but it doesn't have that white space there. Why is that? Because for some reason in just default CSS, when you have margin or padding on an element, then you have to subtract that from the width if it's 100%. The way you can do that is you could do it in two ways. Calc 100% minus 2M, not 1M, because this is adding to the left and right, the top and bottom as well, but we're only concerned with the left and right issues. So 100% minus 2EM, and guess what? Now we have equal white space. Another way of doing it, if I put 100% here, is box hyphen sizing border hyphen box. That will have the same effect, so that you don't have to use the calc function. In fact, some people take this property and they go all the way back here. I'll leave it there actually. They go to the top, or it doesn't matter where, but it's like kind of like one of these type of rule sets that you just designate on everything. You put an asterisk, that means on everything, you're going to have box sizing, border box by default. So you can choose to do that if you want, but this is a simple demo, so having it here, just here on this specific selector will work. Now we also need to specify text align center. That gets that text in the center. We also need to take text decoration none, because we don't want an underline. We want to do font weight bold. Font size, I think 1.3 rem would work. Font, let's text. Wait, we already did text decoration. Color is going to be black. And then a border radius, 0.3 em. What is border radius? Well, notice how they're rounded right now. Well, that's because I used border radius. That will round the corners out. If we wanted bigger, we could do 1 em. If you wanted like pill-shaped, we could do like 6 em. You could do something crazy. But for me, 0.3 em, minimal rounded corners. Otherwise, they're going to be just, sharp right edges, essentially. And so that's all we need to do for there, and that's looking pretty good. Now we have to worry about the cat. And if you look at our reference, we have our cat, we have our outer circle, inner circle, and our cat. We need to get this looking more like this. So what we'll do is reference our cat. Let's look at our HTML structure. We have cat container. This will come into play a little bit later. But we have div class cat, which houses those 3 elements. So in cat, we're going to do position relative. Now this is the first time we're coming across this one. And you'll see how this comes into play in a second. I'll describe it in a second. Height is going to be about 500 pixels, so I'm using an absolute length. We're going to put a width of 100%, and we're going to do an overflow of hidden. Now notice when we put overflow hidden, it kind of hides things. Anything that extends outside of this parent container called cat. And this cat right here currently is really large because by default, when you import like an SVG or a picture, like a PNG, it's going to make it the default size of that picture, which is really large in this case. It's like a really big cat. So what we can do is we can reference that image in there, and we can say width like 70%. Now that's better. Okay. So really, at this point, we don't even need overflow hidden because nothing's overflowing from it. So we can just leave that off. What we want to do now is we want to be able to position these things and move them around however we want them to. So we're going to do position absolute. Position relative on the parent with position absolute on a child element that's nested within it will allow you to do certain things that you wouldn't be able to do if this value was not here. And I'll show you in a second what that means. So I want to do left 50%. Now you can only use left, top, right if your element, the same element, has position of like absolute or fixed or whatever. So we have position absolute. We're going to do left 50%. Now you would think that would like center it 50%, but it doesn't. It puts the beginning of the element on 50%. So to fix that, we create an offset. Transform, translate x negative 50%. This is a common pattern that you just have to remember. Now it is centered. Now it's also too close to get bonkers, right? So what we're going to do is, well, actually, we're not actually, we could just do top like 30% or something like that. That would work, but we're going to do things a little bit more intelligently because we also have 2 other elements in here that will share some similar CSS properties. So what we'll do is specify our inner hyphen circle and then our outer hyphen circle. And what I'll do is inside of here, we want to say both of these are going to be position absolute. Border radius is going to be 50%. That's how you create a circle. All right, but you can't see the circle yet because we haven't given these specific background colors. We're going to do left 50%, top 50%. We're also going to do a transform, translate, negative 50%, just like we did above, except this time we're not using translate x, we're using translate just translate, which means it'll do an X and Y value as well, because we're doing top. So we're essentially doing is we're taking inner circle and outer circle and we're centering it vertically and horizontally. And this is how you do it with these three properties in position absolute. Now again, we don't see them because we haven't given those a background color. Because we have two different background colors, we have to specify those in their own rule sets. Inner circle, we're going to do a background of FFEBC3. And we also have to give it a width. We haven't given this position absolute element a defined width yet, which you need to do. So width, we're going to use a pixel absolute value, 300 pixels, and a height of 300 pixels. Now we can see it. But if we specify up here a z index, oh, we're not going to do it there. We want to specify the z index on this inner circle as -1. That puts it behind the cat. See that? Yes, you do. And then on outer circle, we'll just copy this. The width is going to be 500 instead of 300. And the z-index here is going to be -2. But it's also going to be white, not the same color. There we go. Isn't that cool? Yes, it is. And I think I have left out a property on my reference code because this should not be so close. So I'm going to do some manual maneuvering of situations. Actually, let me see if this helps. I don't think it will. Yeah, it doesn't. For some reason, for whatever reason, it's not matching up with my original code. That's not a big deal. Sometimes stuff like this happens. So what I'll do temporarily, I may have to change this, is like margin top 3M, and that pushes it down. And there you go. This is the finished mobile version of our layout with our navigation that works. So now when we increase this, it looks stupid. When we get up to that size, it just looks dumb. So we need to work with our very first media query. All right, here's how this works. So remember, we started on mobile first. So this is our mobile. And then when we get up to a certain area, we have to make design decisions. At what point do we want to change or make changes to this design? All right, so it's a very important question to ask yourself. So for this media query, we're going to create one down here. And the way you define it is at media min-width. And we're just going to do like 750 pixels. And we open it up in brackets. And inside of here, we put in media queries. These media queries, or sorry, not media queries, but these rule sets will only work or be inactive if the viewport or the browser or the device they're viewing on is at least 750 pixels in width or larger. Okay, very important to understand this. What I can do to show you temporarily, you don't have to do this, just type in body, background, black. Watch what happens. The background of our body element is not black because we're not at or greater than 750 pixels. If we drag this out, it's going to change black. Look at that. And we drag it back in. So right around here is 750 pixels. And we know this specifically if you hit F12. And because when you hit F12 and you do the same thing, and then hit Control forward to zoom in, you could see where it's showing you the exact pixels in the upper right corner by my cursor. Right there. Very cool stuff. Let's close that. We'll go back. Now, what is it that we want to change? Well, I want to add more margin on our wrap, meaning I want to increase this margin value because we're working with a bigger, maybe like a tablet screen. So what I'm going to do is take wrap margin 0 for M units. All right, so if we bring this out, look at that. So now situations have changed to where we have more white space over here, but not as much up here. And this, the fact that there's no white space up here and it looks messed up, I'm not worried about that because that's going to change based on other stuff that we changed down here. Now, we had those utility classes called hide mobile and hide desktop. we need to write those. So hide desktop. We're going to say display none because this is for desktop right here. So when we hide that, that gets rid of that little toggle or the hamburger icon. Why? Because hide desktop exists on that element. Where is it at? Hide desktop right here. It's wrapped around the menu because we don't need the menu on desktop. We're going to show all the links up here. And so this is defined. This is the first time this rule set is defined. It does not exist in our regular CSS out there because it's only relevant if the viewport is bigger than 750 pixels. Now hide mobile, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to display block that. All right, so hide mobile, if we do that, our home button comes back. Because remember, on our design, we have this divider and the home button. We need that back in view. So before, hide mobile is all the way up at top with display none, but we override that rule set here to display block. So hopefully you understand the logic that's occurring here. If you don't worry, you'll figure it out if you stick with this in enough time. So now we want to take our nav, and we have to do a lot of work to bring our nav back. I think though, before we do that, let's get our header, this part. This is wrapped in something called header left, and there's 3 elements. An A element, which wraps around our logo, the divider, and then the home button. So let's go ahead and specify that stuff within the media query. So we're going to say header hyphen left. We're going to say display flex, because if you look, header left is a parent element of these 3 elements, and we want each one of those 3 to be next to each other in columns, not stacked on top of each other by default like they are. So if I save this, notice the home is now to the right of it rather than underneath it. We don't see the divider because we haven't created that the CSS. We're going to do that now though, or in a bit. Now another thing that I want to do is we're going to say justify content space between. All right, nothing changes here because we haven't defined this header left section quite yet. We're going to do align items center. Align items works with display flex to align things vertically. Center is one of the elements or values. Gap 1em unit. This gives us white space between these elements. Now let's get this divider that's kind of hidden here in the middle. So what we do is dividers inside of header left so we can nest it. Height will be about 50 pixels. Width will be 1 pixel. Border right. So we can add borders to things. So border hyphen right. Again, you could do border. If you want a border on all 4, you can just do border. Just the same way that padding and margin works. So we're going to do border right. First value is how thick, 1 pixel. We want it to be solid. You could do dashed and other properties. And then a color. Just going to do gray. Save it. There we go. And there it is. 50 pixels. All centered up, looking good. Now, we need to style this home button because that home button doesn't exactly look like this home button. This is kind of like that purplish color because it's default hyperlink and it's underlined. We don't want that text decoration. So we say A, text decoration, none. And then we also say color black. And then we're going to make it a little bit larger, 1.2 rem. Okay, now let's focus on getting the navigation looking like this over here with our 4 links. So what we have to do is currently our navigation is hanging off to the right of the browser. We can't see it. And it's this big white thing that goes down. We have to create overrides for that. And so we're going to do that right here through NavUL. We open it up, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to unset the position because it has position sticky, right? We're just going to put position, and we're going to say unset. When we do that, it breaks the whole layout because now it's a different position type. Now what we have to do is we're going to specify a background of none, because we don't need that background. A display of flex, because we want those elements to not be stacked on top of each other, but to the left and right of each other. Now also, I could see that this is that X button is still there, and it should not be. That means I forgot to add a class to it. So if we look for the close button, which is right here, it says menu hyphen close. I'm going to look real quickly to my reference code, and menu hyphen close, close menu, hide desktop. Okay, I was supposed to add on the LI here a class of hide hyphen desktop. So now it got rid of it. Okay, sorry about that. Now we have to keep on working within this role set, because there's other changes we still obviously need to make. One of them is going to be the gap, 2 em units between them. That gives us white space between them, as you can see in the upper right corner of this video. And we also have, we're going to do a height. Remember, it's 100 viewport height right now. We're just going to do auto and width auto. Now that brings back this stuff because the height's no longer being set. Notice how this also is no longer all the way up here. Now we also are going to need to override the transform property because it's translate x 100% right now. Translate x 0%. Ah, there we go. Now we're getting a little bit better. Now notice how this font size is kind of large. So I'm going to reset that font size because we don't need it to be that large on desktop. So we're going to say, yeah, let's do LI. Let's do this. We'll do LIA, and then we'll say font size 1.2 rem. There we go. That's much better. Now, notice how this starts to run in, and we have this issue right here. You don't want that. So we are actually, we need to increase the value of this right here. Let's try 768, which is kind of like a common number. Let's see if this works now. Ah, yes, now we have, oh no, it's still doing it. So let's increase this to like 788. All right, so bring it out, bring it out. There it goes. So this is the closest it can get. Oh no, we have to go a little bit higher. Sorry about this. There it goes. Right there. There. Now that's good. That's like the perfect amount, 798 pixels for this design for us to show this. And there we go. That's the markup for this part. Now we just have a few other things that we might want to make adjustments to. For instance, on tablet, we can keep this here centered, this stuff, and all this stuff can, basically stay the same. But at a certain point, we need to transition into this layout, which is the desktop layout. All right, where this stuff is left aligned, and then the kitten and all that stuff is pushed over to the right. So to do that, let's create a new media query. And this is going to be min width, and let's just do like 950 pixels for now. And inside of here, we're going to say header left, and we're going to say display. Let's see here, display. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We already specified header left. Oh, yeah. We need to specify an H1 in the paragraph. Remember, we did this before in text line center. We're going to do text line left now. Now, this doesn't stay left, so we need to modify that. So we're going to say H1 IMG margin 0, because remember we put margin 0 auto on that. Margin 0, we'll just reset it to 0, and there we go. We have our text left aligned. Another thing that I'm going to do is modify the paragraph. The paragraph text, I think it currently is 1.2 rem. I think we're actually going to leave it like this. I'm not even going to make an adjustment. It still looks good to me. And again, a lot of this stuff is subjective. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to take our main element. The main element wraps around these elements right here. So we have main that wraps around these things. Now notice in our design, it's only going about halfway, if that. So we can just take our main element and say width 50%. Notice now how it leaves room for the cat over here. Okay, now what we can do is focus on the cat. And guess what? We're almost done with this. So we're gonna take cat, we're gonna do overflow. That's right, we didn't specify overflow, so we don't have to do an override there. Never mind me. Cat container, we're gonna say position absolute. And that's why we had that cat container. We didn't utilize this before. We haven't created a rule set for cat container until now. And position absolute, we're gonna do a z-index of -1, a width of 50%, a top of 20%, and then a right of 0. That was fast, I know. But another thing, it looks down too far. Remember we added that margin? So let's just take margin, put it at 0. I'm not sure if that was right. So let me see, where's our cat at? Margin top. Okay, so we need to take, that was on cat, not cat container. So cat, margin top, 0. Now it's pushed back up and it's a little bit better. Okay, so let's remove that. All right, and we also want to take, well, let's see how this responds so far. So we're down here, changes. Alrighty. Now what we want to do is adjust these circles. They're not big enough according to our design. These are real big. I may not get it perfect, but the reason I use position absolute for this is so that this stuff can be under. These circles can be under this text. So, we are so close to being done, by the way. So what we can do is, okay, I guess that we can do it on this. I was thinking about adding another media query, but I think this will work. So let's try it. I'm going to take inner circle, and we're going to say width 500 pixels, and we're going to say height 500 pixels. And again, it's not up. Well, let's see here. Is it updating? Okay. Oh, I know why this isn't working. It's because before in inner circle, when we defined all this stuff, it was nested within another tag. So if we go back up to cat, so it's inside a cat, and then in here. So what we need to do is specify either. So what we could do actually is just take this, put it inside of cat up here, save it, and now look how much bigger it got. So that has to do with specificity. I can't even say it. Specificity. Oh my God, I'm terrible. So you just have to make sure if you reference like another selector before it, and you're trying to do override, to also specify that selector too within this rule set. Additionally, we're going to take our outer circle and make that even larger. Let's try like 800. We actually could go like 1200. I mean, we can go much higher. Actually, that might be a little bit too much. Just do 1000, just to get a little bit closer to matched up with, you know, what was happening. That's very cool. Okay, so now we go from this to this. Look how freaking cool that is. Now, if you want the cat to stop growing at a certain point, let's create another media query real quick. Let me just grab this code up here. We'll do this at like 1200. And for the cat, again, we're going to reference this through cat. Let's do position relative on this right here. Let me push this 1 second. And then inside of here, we're going to take our image of the cat, and we're going to say max hyphen width 400 pixels. What max width means instead of width is it's going to grow and be responsive up until it reaches 400 pixels, and then it will stop growing like that. All right, very important to understand that property. It's very helpful. And then we can also do and style it maybe differently, like left 40%. All right, and again, I think that's a little bit too much. Maybe we'll do like 10%. Oh no, I meant to go the other way, like 50%. There we go. It's a little bit better in terms of alignment. We could probably push this down with a margin top as well. And then we're going to take our, actually, no, that's good. Now what we want to do, another thing that's an issue is if you're on like a 4K res monitor like this is crazy and stupid looking. What I want to do at 1200 pixels is give our wrap a max width of 1200 pixels and center it. So here's what this looks like. We're going to say wrap. We're going to say margin, 0 auto to center it. We're going to do a padding of 0 and 2 em units. So 0 on the top and bottom, but 2 em units on the right and left. And then a max width of 1200 pixels. Watch what happens. It stays. It doesn't grow like it was before. It'll grow until it's at 1200. And it looks still pretty good here like this. And you know what? I think Get Bonkers is too close to this. So what I want to do, let's take a look at how this is on the various, in all stages, I want to move this down. So we can come outside of our media queries and find our primary CTA and do a margin top of like, let's try 3 em units. There we go. Now, this is looking better. Another thing I don't like is how big this button is. So in our very last rule set, we can take our a.primary CTA and we could do display inline block, which you haven't seen yet, and a width of auto. Watch what happens. Now it's going to be just the size of the text that's inside of it, which that's one of the things that display inline block does on a link. Width auto here is just, we're just resetting that. It was 100%, but we're just setting it back to auto, like whatever it is by default. And then you can also do other things, like if you want more white space on the right and left, again, you just mess with the padding. So padding, like 1 em on the top and bottom, but 2 em on the left and right, and you extend it out into a nice bigger button. And there you go. So that is our design. It is fully responsive. This was a long video, and that's why I decided not to tackle that whole layout, because we would be here forever. Now, having said that, if you really do want to learn this stuff from scratch, I would highly advise taking the CSS course, because that's where we make layouts from scratch, and we really tackle this in a much more comprehensive manner, in an interactive manner as well. So definitely check this course out in my other courses if you want to learn this stuff, and make sure to subscribe here on YouTube, and I will see you all soon. Goodbye.